It's April the 2nd. Let's talk a little bit here about social networks. We're actually way back. Okay. So, like anytime you try to do something, you try to figure out, well, what are you going to do? Now, it's not a question of whether or not I have a lot to say, because the problem is I generally have too much. So, within the viewing population of this particular social network, what's there that people want to hear? Well, generally that's not what I want to say. Ideally, I'm one of those guys back in 1994, started getting involved in the internet. At that time, I think I was 24 years old. I came to the internet during the age of what is currently the total mass, the greatest influencing mass that's of the internet, and of course, that mass is a little bit... There was something I always thought about when I was in high school, is that there was a revolution that was going to come, and that revolution was going to come from within inside the technology. Now, I grew up around CompuServe, didn't much know about AOL, but yes, I understand that it was also around at the particular time, Prodigy and so forth, so I knew about these particular social networks and what they could specifically do and what was going on. And in those particular networks, you either had just really old people, moderately middle-aged, or just a bunch of young kids that were allowed to be on the particular systems. Essentially, when I grew up, there was very little computer time. As I grew up, I became a very computer person, and so an internet company, and of course, its relationship in the tri-state area of New York. So the internet wasn't this foreign. The idea of YouTube, the idea of what Facebook does, the idea that what MySpace does. I mean, the idea is not different than any other idea that's ever been there before, but the execution, the idea has changed. And I think I'm looking at this and I'm saying, nothing's changed, but something has changed. Well, I guess the belief is the most powerful thing that has changed. You watch the YouTube videos and you get this opinion, or you read through logs or journals or whatever you run into, and you see that we've got a new generation that really feels empowered to their access to knowledge. And what's that going to change? Did this last presidency, can somebody stand up proud and say, it was the internet that won? Well, the internet has had a lot of wins. First commercial thing that the internet did was back in that 1994. Intel had a mistake within one of their chips, and if it wasn't for the internet and the community of the internet coming together, that company could have just gone forward and never had to recall their computer chips. Right? So that's when the community was terribly small. What are we looking at now? Well, something like, what are the numbers? Things that we need to look at. So I find it amazing that here it is that we're having this video log every day in April. And what's going to come out of it? What are going to come out of the people's thoughts? When do they get past the humor of their life, or humor of what they see in life, and get into the seriousness of things? Or is it really seriousness and humor is supposed to go together? What's going to come from this generation? What is it to do to support the next up and coming generation? And then, of course, what about my son? The generation yet to find. What is it that he's going to have access to? You know, how is he going to need to be nurtured and educated? And what access to knowledge does he need to be successful? And I find it amazing what's happened so far, the changes that have come